tell us a little bit about your podcasting books and why you wrote those.
Last time we interviewed, I got into it a lot. So I encourage everybody, go back and listen to that because these episodes go really well together. But to give the overview, I'm one of 30 authors that was involved in it. It was presented to me from the PodMatch community specifically. And they said, hey, we love this product. Can we write a book about it and you be involved? And long story short, I ended up writing the acknowledgments page and the introduction, and then reviewing all the content and things like that, and loved it. Learned a lot myself, grew from it as a podcast guest and host. And real quick, if you didn't catch the last interview, PodMatch is a service that works literally just like a dating app, but instead of connecting people for dates, it connects people for podcast interviews. So if you are someone who has a skill set and you're saying, I want to talk about this on podcast as a guest, it'll automatically match you with a host who says, that's the guest I'm looking for, and vice versa. And that's exactly how it works. And these books are just to support either side of the mic. So how to become a better podcast guest and how to become a better podcast host. And like I said, in that last episode, we talked about the hosting side. I know, John, today we're getting into being a podcast guest. So I'm looking forward to diving into that.
What about stories like we one time were doing a webinar and the power spiked or something, the laptop went down, like chaos, like literally 40 seconds before the webinar started. We had to reboot, we managed to, let people know in an email and then got back up. It was crazy. Have you had guesting experiences or any horror shows?
Real quick, the thing I'm most scared of on either side of the mic is the technology. I have a great mic right here. Tomorrow, this thing could say, I'm not working, I'm not doing it. And I have no control over that. So the tech is what scares me the most because you never know. Or this was a couple months ago, me and another industry expert, he was a ticketed event and I was the keynote for it. He brought me in, and while I was there, 3 minutes in, everything just went out, which like never happens where I'm at. Like that's like the first time in years. But like it was so bad that it wasn't just my internet and everything. My cell phone didn't even work. Nothing. It was a full blackout on my grid. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. Like I'm not in some small town. Like there was no storm. And so he's over here trying to call me and text me, figure out where I'm at. My phone isn't even working. And I like walked outside, everybody, like all the businesses, everything was a full blackout. And it's funny how much we rely on the internet because I'm like, wow, I literally can't, everything I do is on the internet. But that was one of those things. There was nothing I could do about that. And so 4 hours later, when everything came back on, I was like, I am so sorry. He's like, what the heck happened? Like people paid to hear you. And I was like, everything shut down. Like, if you don't believe me, here's some news articles about how like the entire city just went black.
What are some other sort of mistakes that guests make?
First off, I think the most important thing on podcasting on either side of the mic is delivering on the promise it's made specifically by the podcast and the title and description of the episode. And that sounds like a lot, but the title of this show is Talk Marketing Made Easy. And I'm not exactly sure what you'll make the title because we're recording it right now. But like if it's about being a guest on a podcast and I go on a story tangent talking about something in my childhood that doesn't reinforce, again, that does not directly reinforce the point that we're trying to make, then I'm not delivering on the promise. So it's very important. And this is probably a guest tip as well. So hopefully you went back and listened to the last one, but making sure that the expectation is set up front. And John, I got to say, you do such a good job with this, not just with me. Like you gave me a rough outline of where we'd probably go so that I know the expectation of, okay, I know exactly where I'm going with this conversation, what's going to add value to the audience. But also just to give you a shout out, I listened this morning to episode 12 of your show, 012, with Rock from Squadcast with some podcasting tips and tricks. I can tell that both of you knew the intent of that episode. It shined through the whole thing. So again, as the guest, if the host does that, don't be like, yeah, sure, I know what I'm going to talk about. Because a lot of guests do that and they just start ranting. It's like, well, that's definitely not the direction the host was trying to go in. Being a good guest means being in tune with what the host wants. Even if the host doesn't do a good job, try to figure it out, right? But as the guest saying, okay, I know the promise that we're supposed to deliver to the listener. Let's make sure we deliver it with excellence. So when they leave, they feel inspired, they feel equipped, and further along than they were before. Even if it's just to make them laugh, if it's a comedy podcast or something sports related, deliver on the promise that's being made. It's not always just straight up education. It could be something more simple than that, but make sure that you know what it is and that you do your part, which is a large part of it. Because if it's a good podcast host, they're going to talk about 10% of the time and the rest of the 90% is you, the guest. So make sure that you're fulfilling the promise that the host wants you to make.
What about promoting a book? You know, you have two new books. I've got a book called Talk Marketing just coming out, my third book. But I would like to hear a little bit about someone like Jack Canfield, who I met years ago, that He wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul and started that whole series. And he sold 500 million books and largely said it was from radio interviews. How could PodMatch help people with a book to promote it?
It's going to help because it provides a platform for you to share your expertise from the book. So what that means is a lot of people who don't know you won't necessarily buy your book, but if they hear you and that you develop that know, like, and trust with them, and that's what podcasting does, they might say, you know what, this John guy is this is my people. I'm grabbing John's book because I know that me and John are so similar. Like, talk marketing sounds great. I know I just need to grab it because you develop that relationship with them. Something that a lot of people that get miss on podcasting is it's not like social media. Nothing against social media, that's fine, but it's like talking to people that are sitting in seats. If you're in a room full of 50 people and you're on stage and they all want to be there and they want to hear you, that is powerful. And so, like, imagine if you only have 50 listeners total. Like, that's still a powerful situation for an author to be in because you get that opportunity to develop that know, like, and trust. And I think that alone right there, that is the power of it.
How do people book themselves as guests and find places to be interviewed on with your tool, with PodMatch?
First off, I explained what PodMatch was, so I'll give you the URL to that. I'm going to give you John's link specifically because it is always going to be the best deal you can get on PodMatch. If you go to podmatch.com, you can find it, but I can't always promise that'll be the best deal. But I can promise you, if you go to joinpodmatch.com/talkmarketing, joinpodmatch.com/talkmarketing, that will always be the best deal you can ever get. So I encourage you to go there if you want to be a guest host or both. You have all those options. And this will definitely help, but you still have to do the outreach. Let me put it that way. The culture of podcasting has shifted in the last few years. During 2020, a lot of people started deciding, hey, I'm going to be a guest on podcasts. That's a good thing to do. So the culture has shifted to less hosts do outreach now. Like, they kind of hit a certain point where they have so many guests coming to them, they get to pick who they want. So you have to be the guest that stands out among the rest. And I don't mean you need to be doing anything crazy. Like, you don't need to set yourself on fire and show them how willing you are to burn for them, right? Like, you don't need to do anything like that. But what you can do is have a really good pitch. And so on PodMatch, that's the opening message. And John, if it's okay, I'd love to quickly share just a few steps I always do, if that's all right. So step one is to lead with value. Leading with value doesn't mean talking about yourself. Leading value means talking about the host. And so again, I mentioned I listen to a podcast before I go on it. I listen and I leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple before I'm ever even pitching the podcast. So that way, when I reach out, I can say, hey, John, want to let you know I listen to your podcast. I really loved episode 12 with Rock talking about Squadcast and some other podcasting tips. And I liked it so much, I left you a 5-star rating and review. Here it is. I just attached it. Here's the thing. If you start off that way, which I've only had one person ever do out of the hundreds of people that have reached out to be on my show, they instantly had my attention. And I was already pre-positioned to be like, this person's probably gonna be on my show unless they're crazy, right? But that automatically gets you the attention. Instead of saying, I'm this, I'm that, I'm an expert, I can help you, I. Lead with value is step number one. Number two is to make a meaningful request. A meaningful request simply means actually having a request. John, I can't tell you how many pitches I get that I don't even know what they are. Like, I read it, it's like 3 paragraphs, which already is too long. Pro tip, keep it short. So that's another point, right? Keep it short, please. But so it's like really long, and I'm like, there's no asking here. Like, I don't know what this person wants from me. Have a clear ask in it. So you lead with value, you make a meaningful request. And what that means is, John, I noticed that your podcast talks a lot about marketing, but you haven't had anyone talking about being a podcast guest yet. I would be honored to come on your show and add value by being that guest. That is a meaningful request. It's clear what I want. I set that expectation very well.